So I want to just talk about these two sets of points. One is about the history of fishery subsidies, and the other is the implications of to India and what we can do in relation to the July 2022 agreement. So you see, we often, when we talk about fishery subsidies, we only talk about the debate which took place after the WTO, but after the formation of the WTO. But what really is important is that even before the WTO was created, we had this organization called GATT. And right from those days, in the early 50s, there's been a lot of discussion about subsidies. So this is not something which is new. And this is a fact that we must keep in mind. The second thing about the history is that, you see, the developed world, including, I would put in the USSR, the socialist countries, they are where they are today because of the huge subsidies which were given by their respective states to the fisheries and the fishers, right from the early 20th century. So they should not forget that they are standing on a huge edifice of subsidies which they got earlier. So therefore, I think this big talk in the WTO, which is led by the developed world largely, about curbing subsidies is very hypocritical. This is a good imagery of what is happening. You see, you climb up the wall, climb up the top with a ladder, and when you reach the ladder, you reach the top, you push down the ladder and prevent others from climbing up. So this is what is actually happening. And so this is an attempt to deprive those who are latecomers into this issue of subsidy from gaining the benefits of subsidies. Also, you see, we have to remember that this debate on fishery subsidies has always been used as a bargaining chip for other things in the WTO and in the GATT. So if those of you who are aware of this, the agreement on agriculture, for example, it was almost stalled, and it was only when fisheries was removed from that agreement that it was possible to come to any conclusion for the agreement on agriculture. I won't go into more details because this debate on subsidies in fisheries has been tossed around quite a bit. And the latest example is what happened in July. And I think that there is more to what happened in the green room than what has been told to us. Perhaps some give and take on the TRIPS agreement and things like that made it possible for India to take the stand that it did in July. So what then are the implications? What we have is the two pillars. The third pillar is missing. So you have this stool which has normally 3 legs, but now there's only 2. So you know what happens with the stool when you have only 2 legs. So this is probably what we are going to face. And I think it's important that we reckon with this. So, but at the same time, even in its current form, I feel that the government of India will have to seriously consider the issue of management of our fishery. And this is a topic which the government of India has not been looking into adequately enough. So perhaps even in this kind of 2-pillar agreement, the government of India will now be in a sense, obliged to come up with an EEZ Act, which I think is something which is long overdue. So that is one of the positive impacts of this. Also, I feel because of this, within our country, the way we regulate our fishery will also get greater attention. And here, what I mean is that fishery is a state subject, especially the fishery within the territorial zone. It is the fishery outside the territorial zone, which is under the control of the center. But fish being what it is, moving around in a fluid milieu, is not something that can be regulated by one or the other. And we need to have much more cooperation in this process. And I would even suggest that the thought process of bringing fisheries into the concurrent list should be taken into consideration at this time. Given that, my own take on this is that we should not stop subsidies. There's no way that that can happen. It should not happen. We should increase the subsidies, but we should change the purpose for which these subsidies are being given. I think that is the moot point. And I would like to place before you a few suggestions. There are many others, and especially for the consideration of our trade unions and fish worker organizations to consider. So the examples that I'm giving are examples which I feel will help to create a more ecologically and economically sustainable and a more equitable and a self-reliant marine fishery in our country. So the first thing is we need to provide subsidies for rebuilding stocks. I've just in this picture shown you one possible way. This is not the only possible way. There are lots of other ways of rebuilding stocks. And I don't want to get into that in detail because I want to give you the list. So rebuilding stocks is something that's very important. And I'm sure fish workers will support the need for this. Then I think we should have possibility for buying back some of the trawlers, and in this way reduce the capacity that is there in the fishery. There are lots of trawler owners who would be happy to get a small deal on the trawler and take it out of action, maybe even sink it and make it an artificial reef. So we should do this. This is the only way we can reduce the overcapacity, by providing an incentive like this. And this is not contrary to the WTO Act, even as it was discussed in July 2022. Then I feel we should give subsidies for downscaling, because over time, what has happened is that since our waters have become open access, where everybody is free to go, and it's only the right of possession that prevails in the water. In other words, if you go and catch the fish, it's yours, but it's not a right that you can exercise. So what has happened is there has been a huge upscaling, an Olympic race of upscaling, and this has resulted in losses for everybody. So we need to provide subsidies for downscaling, to bring down the horsepowerage, to make sure that there is something like a quota for the horsepower availability for, say, a district, and that this is based on the catch potentials and so on. But a downscaling, which I can explain if there are questions, is something for which subsidies should be given. The other realm where subsidies can be given is for multiple energy use. Now, I've only shown this electric outboard engine, but we now have electric scooters, we have electric cars, and we can easily get electric outboard engines. There are people who are already manufacturing them for the tourist sector. So it's not a big jump to make electric outboard engines. And this will, the clamor for kerosene subsidies and so on will go down if something like this can happen. And also provide subsidies for using the sail. I mean, the rest of the world is now going into sail. Even big container ships are using sails. Of course, they are controlled by computers and all the rest of it. But why can't we also promote the use of the sail? Then we have to provide subsidies for improving the quality of our fish. This is where we will really support half the women, which was mentioned. The 50% of the fish workers are women. And this is something which is desperately needed. The improving the facilities, the markets, and all the rest of it in our domestic realm. And this is the only way we can improve our export earnings. You see, if we don't improve our domestic fish markets, we will not be able to really match up with the kind of quality that countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and so on provide in the export earning, in the export trade. So this is another realm where subsidies need to be given. The other is, with climate change, for example, I know the data in Kerala, last year, there were as many as 70 days when fish workers were not permitted to go out to sea. Now, what do? They cannot earn an income doing other work. So we must have what is called the parametric insurance measures for compensation. That is, very simply put, there are 2 or 3 parameters which are decided by the government and the insurance agencies and in this case, the IMO, the IMD and others. And when those parameters are in place, that is, for example, if the wind speed is over a certain speed, if the wave height is in excess of a certain amount, if some other parameter like rainfall is also there, then what happens is no questions asked. On that day, every fisher is given a compensation, say like the minimum wage in that state or country as the case may be. So this is something which we should we should provide subsidies for. Then finally, the need to improve the fishery-specific human capabilities of fish workers, and especially the younger people. Because today, the world over, there is huge demand for skilled fish workers. And I think from India, we can provide for that market. But this should be based on really good training, which is provided. Training in, reading maps, in, all the meteorological issues, in the fishery codes, and in understanding your human rights and things like that. And probably even in language, a fisher who can speak English will now be accepted in Scotland if he can prove his fishery skills, but he needs to know English. So even language skills, if we can improve, then, the fish workers in this country, so many of them can have a very lucrative occupation in other countries. But for all these points that I mentioned, what we need really is the support from below. We need to have the fish workers themselves working out what are the realms from where the support is needed. It's not just for diesel and kerosene. This is the only realm that people are thinking about. But we need to widen our thoughts to other areas which will really benefit us in a holistic way. And for this, we need the support of the fish workers. So thank you very much for listening to me patiently. And I will end with that.